Story 1. The drill instructors hated it when someone would fart inside. So the drill instructor would yell, "Turn on the vacuum," and we would all have to yell, "Turn on the vacuum, aye aye sir." Then we would have to start huffing the air as hard as possible to clear the smell out. Story 2. At the Naval Academy, the squirrels are referred to as yard dogs. There are a lot of them. Sometimes you are told to go hunt yard dogs as a form of punishment, literally meaning go chase squirrels. One of my squad mates was given the order to fix bayonets and go hunt yard dogs, which she did. The upperclassman who gave her that order was not amused when she returned an hour later with 2 squirrels impaled on her bayonet. Story 3. We had a guy whose last name was Little John. Right at the peak of Little John the rapper's career, one drill instructor told him that every time he said, "What?" to our Little John, he was to yell as loud as he could, "Yeowa." The other instructors had no idea of this. So occasionally the tasking drill instructor would whisper, "What?" to Little John, usually when we were doing something that mandated silence, like drill or formation. The sight of a dozen seasoned Marine drill instructors' heads spinning, and then beelining directly to him after he shouted "Yeah" at the top of his lungs was a regular occurrence. Story 4. A guy had a kind of lazy eye. He kept getting called out for looking around, which was not allowed. They got tired of constantly calling him out. It was literally multiple times a day. They just ordered him to look out the squad bay window anytime they had to muster. He had a standing order to raise his hand if he saw anything interesting. Of course, if he didn't raise his hand at all, he would get reprimanded. If he did raise his hand but it wasn't interesting enough, he would get reprimanded. One time, he saw a goose on the parade field and was ordered to go out there and deal with it. And he did, only to get yelled at for disturbing the wildlife. Story 5. Heard a story about a man who had to whitewash a wall in the 1950s at his army base. When finished, he stepped back to admire his handiwork and accidentally kicked the paint tin over. He watched, mortified, as whitewash started pooling on the tarmac. What to do? Light bulb moment. He painted the pool into a square and said nothing. 30 years later, he visited the camp to find his square still there, freshly painted. If you have ever been in the army, you will understand. Story 6. Literally moved gravel one piece at a time, from one side of the parking lot to the other, and then back in full battle gear in the middle of August in Arizona. Took the squad about 7 hours to complete the task. And yes, it was terrible. Story 7. Boot camp, Army, mid-1990s. We are loading up the equipment after the end of the cycle field training exercise when 3 other soldiers and I are carrying this large Pelican crate toward the truck, and a drill sergeant comes toward us and calls out, "Wait, stop." We quickly set the crate down, and one soldier yells, "Hammer time," while doing the MC hammer dance, the side-to-side one, with his hands still behind his back in the position of parade rest. The drill sergeant yells, "Come here, hammer time. Come here." The soldier follows along behind the drill sergeant over to where the rest of the training cadre were sitting around, including the company commander. The drill sergeant says, "Show the commander what you just did. Go on, hammer time. Show him. And don't stop until he tells you to." The soldier looks from the commander to him and back to the commander again. He suddenly gets this look on his face that says, "Well, I'm already in trouble. I might as well make it memorable." He suddenly starts doing the MC hammer dance, side to side, hands still behind his back at parade rest, yelling out, "Hammer time! Hammer time! Hammer time!" That was funny enough, and the cadre were all laughing, and the commander just smiled and shook his head. Wrong answer. This soldier leaned into his punishment, yelling out, "Hammer time! Break down! Unreal!" That got them all going good. But it was when the soldier abandoned all semblance of discipline and suddenly spun around, clapped once, and started the run in place that MC Hammer used to do as well. He then went back to the first dance, back to yelling, and just kept going. By now, the cadre are laughing so hard that some of them are trying to get away from the scene because their tough personas are cracked, and the commander is laughing so hard he has fallen to the ground on one knee, holding his side. He keeps trying to catch his breath and tell the soldier to stop, but every time he looks up, the soldier adds another move to the dance and sends him laughing again. This goes on for about 20 minutes, and the entire company has lost it. Even the first sergeant couldn't keep it together. Story 8. There was an air crash years ago at an airshow in Fairford, and I was working at another base. There was a call for volunteers with security clearance to go and guard parts of the crash site because they were worried about any sensitive materials being taken. I ended up guarding a patch of oily ground for about 3 days in shifts with 2 other men. Most of the really tedious tasks were similar to what they would assign you to do if a senior official was visiting for a day, and there were not enough people on punishment duties at the guardhouse to complete them. For example, painting rocks lining the road white, or in one case, they had people painting the grass green because they said it was too patchy for Princess Anne's visit. In fact, thinking back to that one Princess Anne visit, they also tasked someone with guarding the helicopter she arrived in while she was being given the tour. Who exactly did they think was going to steal it on a very secure military base with many armed personnel anyway? Story 9. When our trainer instructor was first teaching us how to polish our boots, he would tell us to take a minuscule dab of polish on a cloth and work a tiny spot on our boots with it. Get that spot really shiny. It would take weeks to polish your boots this way, and in the meantime, they would look unattractive and not be protected from the elements. It was less funny and more just pointless. The master sergeant, who was an actual skilled individual and not a complete idiot like my trainer instructor, wasn't having any of that. He came over, showed everyone how to get a large amount of polish on your application brush, work it over the entire boot, and then go over the whole thing with the large brush. Boom, boots looked amazing in just 10 minutes. Story 10. Once, I went to my dad's office, and this guy was opening and closing the door over and over again. He opened it for me, but then kept opening and closing it. My dad just started talking to me like he didn't even notice. I finally said, "What is this all about?" And my dad yelled, "Corporal Van Dynes, my son wants to know what this is about." The poor guy snapped to attention and said, "I'm to open and close the door until I learn to do it properly, sir. And I'm to keep doing it until you get tired, sir." Apparently, the poor guy had closed the door too hard or something. Story 11. Wasn't even at basic yet. We were still in reception. The drill sergeant comes out and asks who has a driver's license. A few of us raise our hands, and he has us follow him. I'm thinking I'm about to do something cool. Nope. He walked us over to the shed and started pulling out push mowers. "You're going to drive these machines." Story 12. 3 things come to mind from when I was in the Marines. 1. During one of our trips to the rifle range for annual qualification, a Navy corpsman was killed by a bullet ricocheting off of the right lateral limit sign, and a V-22 Osprey was brought in to take his body away. But the first Osprey broke down, so we had to set up rotating shifts of guards until it could be repaired and flown off of the rifle range. This was in the middle of a base in Japan. Also, while stationed in Japan, our battalion leadership wanted all of the large tents pulled out and set up for inspection because we were getting ready to start pre-deployment training for Iraq, and we would be using the tents during field exercises. Tents were pulled out of storage, set up, inspected, and then we were told to set up rotating shifts of people to guard them. Again, in the middle of a base in Japan, because clearly someone might come along, disassemble a huge tent, and cart it off in the night. While on deployment in Iraq, another company in our battalion took a couple of our vehicles on a mission without prior approval from our company commanding officer. So we had to assign 2 Marines to guard the vehicles every night to make sure no one came to take any of them. This was in the middle of a base in Iraq. Narrator: no one ever came to try and take any of the vehicles. Story 13. We were out on the range and I was told to look out for aircraft and call a ceasefire if I saw any flying in the direction or past the range. I was told to stand on top of a hill and use my binoculars. I was not issued binoculars. Nobody was. So I used my hand binoculars. I was approached by another drill sergeant and asked what I was doing, and I told him I was looking for aircraft. Then I had to take a leak, so I asked someone to take over, handed them the binoculars, and he took over for me. The drill sergeants laughed so hard they relieved both of us from aircraft watch. Army Basic Training, Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, 2011. Story 14. Shut your cockholsters. Funny before the sobering. Now, I know you don't hear anything from the outside world, but you need to know. We are going to have a moment of silence for Bernie Mac. Yes, Bernie Mac has died. Dating myself here, But I lost a television father figure and found out because I had a dark green device interface. Story 15. I disassembled rusty barbecues, scraped the rust off the pieces, reassembled them, and then threw them out. They were picked up and crushed. Story 16. A former coworker of mine told me about a guy who, when he was in basic training, literally could not stop making mistakes. The drill sergeant made him carry a plant everywhere he went to replace the oxygen that he was wasting. Story 17. We had someone steal a cookie off of another person's tray in the dining hall and get caught. He was forced to worm crawl the length of the squad bay and back for the rest of the day, using only his shoulders for propulsion and saying cookies, cookies, cookies. The whole way, he had his arms behind his back, laying on his stomach, moving forward with his shoulders. He had raw, bloody shoulders, and no more cookies were stolen. Story 18. My girlfriend was in the Navy and said that after one of their sailors did something unwise, a couple of the chiefs made them use mops on the aircraft carrier deck during a rainstorm. Story 19. Office training school in San Antonio, Texas. Middle of summer. Temperature 104 degrees. 100% humidity. Per orders, we were out mowing the grass, dirt and rocks because it was too hot for grass. Dressed in protective gear that included full coverage fatigues, eye and face masks, and steel toe coverings. We did it. Eventually, some superior officer caught wind of it and told us to stop. Story 20. I did basic training at Fort Benning around 1990. At one point, about midway through basic training, we had a scheduled training activity, but it fell through for some reason, so the drill sergeants had to come up with something quick. They took us out to a field with a big stack of cut wood and had us move the stack across the field. It was just busy work and physical conditioning. They left us to it and went off to get some coffee. When they came back, we were nowhere near done, so they started making us do push-ups, flutter kicks, and other exercises. They demanded to know why we weren't done, and a guy next to me said, "Come on, drill sergeant. Rome wasn't built in a day." With absolutely no hesitation, the drill sergeant responded, "Oh yeah? Well, I wasn't in charge of that detail." We all started laughing at that point, and he left us to finish our busy work. Story 21. There are many classic memes in the Finnish military regarding conscription about pointless situations. Especially in the past, there were many. During my basic training, a sergeant actually made us participate in one of these scenarios. One night, someone in the tent we were in complained about how cold it was, and another person joined in the complaining. The sergeant, who was also in the tent, suddenly sprang up and said, "If the unit has a problem, it must be rectified. Team, the tent is to be moved 10 meters to the south, where the climate is warmer." And then we spent half an hour setting the tent up again 10 meters away. Story 22. My father told me that while at Air Force Boot Camp in Amarillo, Texas, in the late 1950s, the group commander made them pick up all the rocks in a field. Story 23. I heard a story from my older brother that when he was in basic training, he was going through the chow line and took 2 scoops of food when he wasn't supposed to. So, the drill sergeants made him stand next to the chow line as everyone else was going through and yell, "1 scoop only, 1 scoop only," over and over again. This wasn't in basic, but when I was in the Army years later, we were doing a training exercise and one of the newer soldiers kept losing things. They ended up tying everything down to him with paracord. Literally, his canteen, his weapon, his compass, everything in his pockets, all tied to his belt with lengths of paracord so he wouldn't lose it. Story 24. A couple of guys hated wearing their cover hat, so they kept forgetting to put it on when going outside. The sergeant made them each wear the other guy's hand as cover for a few days. They looked so ridiculous and miserable walking around holding another man's bald head. Story 25. Royal Navy Basic Training, May 2000. Our division had a very special recruit. If, when you lost a bit of kit, failed a task, or generally annoyed the petty officer, you were given remedial training or remedials. Shoes not buffed correctly? Have a boots remedial, meaning you had to report to the petty officer's office 4 times per day with buffed shoes to prove it was done and get a chit signed. Lost an item? Report to the petty officer's office 4 times per day with the replaced item to prove you still had it and get a chit signed. And so on. Most of us young sailors had at least one remedial action to carry out over the course of our time at Raleigh, as well as the usual program of fun and games that was Phase 1 training. However, our special once-per-generation sailor had multiple remedials every week and even managed to lose his remedials chits. So the petty officer gave him remedials where he had to report with a chit to log the fact he had all of his chits present and correct. Then the little fellow went and lost that. As a division, we never really understood why he was back squatted. I hope he is doing well. He is probably a flag officer at Whitehall now. Story 26. In basic training, we were made to lint roll the floor. The team instructor turned the lights off during an inspection and shined a flashlight at floor level. Of course, he found wool fibers. Because our blankets are wool. Story 27. Polished the restroom trough into a super mirror-like stainless steel finish. No one was allowed to use it in the 4 months we were there. You could drink coffee out of it if you wanted. It was so clean. I can't think what the next batch of recruits must have thought. At least it passed inspection every single time. Those were the days. Story 28. Oh man. In basic training, our brother Flight was caught whining too much. So we had to go in and read them bedtime stories as they lay in bed in the middle of the day because if they want to act like babies, they will be treated as such. I guess it was supposed to be humiliating for them. We all enjoyed the downtime. Since being in, when deployed, and we are all aircraft maintainers, there was a kid walking up and down a hallway in a bright yellow safety vest with a note taped to the back that said, "Ask me why." So when he turned around and came back towards me, I asked why, and he apparently lost a flashlight. Story 29. A friend received multiple punishments for the destruction of government property every time he nicked himself while shaving. Story 30. Caught a man singing to himself while folding laundry. I put him in the wall locker and proceeded to yell, "Play me a song, jukebox." The only song the man knew the words to was apparently the Gilligan's Island theme song. I got exhausted one afternoon in the day room until I couldn't keep my palms from slipping in sweat on the tile floor. My crime was that I ate a pack of Oreos I wasn't supposed to. Another memorable moment involved a man who had some slowness or mental issues. He was tasked to fetch rocks and sprint to get them. Nope, not that one. I would say as I threw it for quite a while. Story 31. Boot camp. Woken up at 3 a.m. Cycled until it rained in the barracks. Then had to clean up the senior chief's floor with our t-shirts that we got all dirty by sweating on. Then we got yelled at for having messed up our laundry and cycled again. It was time for morning physical training when we were done. I was in boot camp over Christmas. The same senior chief brought us a TV on New Year's Day so we could watch bowl games and bought us all pizza. So he wasn't all bad. Story 32. I was a supervisor at a transient personnel unit, a unit made up of individuals who were getting out for one messed up reason or another. I had to find things for them to do. I made one person polish the white gravel in the building's flower beds with a toilet brush. It was completely pointless. Story 33. I was in artillery. The section leader sent a new recruit over to the maintenance shed for a can of muzzle blast. He spent about 15 minutes looking for it before we told him the joke. Story 34. At Keesler Air Force Base, fresh from boot camp, we were issued grass rakes at 7 a.m. assembly and told to make north-south lines in the sand. At 8 a.m., we got yelled at for doing it wrong and told to make east-west lines in the sand. At 9 a.m., we got yelled at for doing it wrong and told to make north-south lines. This continued until noon, when we were all released for the day. We all did that for 4 days and then the weekend arrived. We were free until Monday when classes started. Story 35. One person became very upset about something or someone at the Regional Training Center Great Lakes one time and ended up ripping a toilet seat off. The regional development centers made him wear it around his neck everywhere for a week. Story 36. Blimp watch as punishment in Army intelligence training at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. There is a stationary blimp that is tethered and helps monitor the United States and Mexico border. 12 hours spent making sure it did not float away. Every hour on the hour, one of us had to find the duty drill sergeant and give him a status update. Story 37. When I was in Fort Benning for basic training back in 1998, I got skinned up. I don't even remember what it was for, probably for interrupting the drill sergeant in the staff room like I was asked to buy another drill sergeant. Anyway, this drill sergeant had me start doing jumping jacks. He had to go up to one of the barracks, so he told me to follow him. I had to follow him across the parade area, up the stairs, into the barracks, and back downstairs, all while doing jumping jacks the entire time. He was genuinely impressed when we got back downstairs. Story 38. We had to clean up the spent shell casings from a day at the range. They get everyone in a line called an emu parade, and one of the officers yells to everyone, "You are going to slowly walk and pick up these brass casings. You will do 3 passes of this range, and any brass you find on the second and third pass will be 5 push-ups for everyone. So don't miss any. The first pass goes by, and I have a hat full of brass. No problem. On the second pass, a friend of mine finds a casing, and sure enough, everyone does 5 push-ups, including the corporals. Now I see this and think it's time for a little payback. So every now and again, I grab a shell from my hat and flick it down the line in front of someone else. They pick it up and we do push-ups. It's the end of a 3-month recruit course, so all the recruits are fit as anything, making push-ups a breeze, but the corporals are not so fit. Now there are about 5 of us throwing these casings ahead. We must have done over 100 push-ups by the end of it, with every corporal and sergeant dripping with sweat and struggling to breathe. I was laughing so hard I couldn't breathe by the end of it. I missed those clowns. Story 39. At Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego, which is alongside San Diego International Airport, if you were caught looking at a plane taking off, you would have to chase the plane and bring it back to the drill instructor. Story 40. We had a person who was completely unhelpful and pretended to be injured to avoid difficult tasks. Our section commander made him perform eyebrow raises for a couple of hours instead of push-ups. Story 41. I got one. I'm 5 feet 2 inches tall, male, and I joined the military at 17 years old and I was scrawny. In basic training, there were all the short jokes, but one particular drill sergeant decided that I and a few other short soldiers had to perform the Lollipop Guild song from The Wizard of Oz, including the dance number. It was humiliating. In that song, the guys kicked their feet out and I accidentally kicked a rock at one of the other drill sergeant's boots, so he took it as intentional and punished us for it. More than a decade later, I am still upset about it. Story 42. Canadian Forces Detachment Dunedin, a militia summer training camp, late 1980s. The legendary punishment for defaulters was to change the water in the puddles on the parade square. Mop it up and pour out fresh water from a bucket you refilled 200 meters away. Repeat. Story 43. Obligatory not me, but my dad told me a story from when he was in basic training where he was laughing at some guys getting punished. The drill sergeant made him do a punishment called raid for half an hour. Raid involved lying on your back with your arms and legs in the air, repeating, "I'm a dying cockroach." Raid got me the entire time. Story 44. When I was in boot camp for the Navy in the mid-2000s, our compartment was all at attention, waiting to go into where graduation was held with all the other new recruits to meet the captain at the time. Someone in our compartment was getting antsy, trying to be let out of line to go to the bathroom, and ended up starting to cry as he peed himself. Another guy in our compartment started laughing at him. When we got back to the barracks later, they made everyone line up at attention and called out the guy who started laughing when the other guy peed himself. They made him do constant push-ups while laughing, while we all stood there watching. Once he started crying, they called the guy who peed himself over and had him instruct all of us to start laughing at him for crying for another 10 minutes or so. Story 45. Pointless task? That's 90% of it. The colonel got caught with his feet up at headquarters because no one called out the 3-star division commander entered the building. Cue us straightening poles along all the walking paths and cleaning cigarette butts out of turtle ditches for 3 days. Spent a weekend laying mulch around trees for getting caught walking on the grass. So you want me to walk on it more? We had a major inspection and our room was plastered floor to ceiling with centerfolds. We were told you couldn't show crotch, so I went around slapping post-it notes over all the inappropriate images. It was allowed because I guess they were afraid of what I would think up next, or they didn't think there was enough time to tear them all down. I wrote, "Does your wife know you're looking at this?" on the back of one. Guess which one the 06 flipped up? Yup. He didn't say anything, just turned around and left. I burst out laughing while everyone above my E3 rank was trying to see what it said. Story 46. We had a person in basic training who laughed at something the drill instructor said. A lot of the things they say, ripping into others, are quite humorous, by the way. The person who laughed was made to stand in the hallway and laugh for about 10 to 15 minutes. We continued with our tasks, hearing a monotone ha 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 while we did. Story 47. I got caught leaning against a wall in the barracks. From then on, if I was in the hall and someone approached, I had to hold the wall with both hands and yell, "Caution! Falling wall!" I also walked too close to the drill sergeant's table in the dining hall once. After that, whenever someone else got too close, I would have to run around the table, waving my arms and yelling, "No-fly zone!" Story 48. When I was in basic training in the Army, we had a guy who had an unfortunate incident. From that point on, until we graduated, he was known as Shitler. I do not remember his actual last name, just the name the drill instructor gave him. Story 49. I had to carry a tree stump and pretend it was an anti-tank gun. That thing weighed so much. I still think about that sometimes. I think I did something stupid, and that was my punishment. I carried that thing around for quite a while. Story 50. I was tasked to disinfect the base with a mix of water and chlorine during COVID times using exterminator-type sprayers. Only whenever we would run out of chlorine, which was pretty often, I still had to do it to maintain appearances. So I had to wake up very early before everybody was up and just water the edges and cracks of all the buildings in the Army base. Story 51. When Mr. T was in the Army, his drill instructor ordered him to chop down some trees as punishment. He wasn't told how many trees to chop. Mr. T managed to chop down 70 trees in a 3.5-hour period. Story 52. Our drill sergeant made us do the Spider-Man push-up. So you get into push-up position and then you start crawling like Spider-Man. Then, as you are doing a push-up, you stretch out your arm and make the web shooting gesture with your hand, just like Spider-Man, and then you crawl forward. That counts as 1 repetition. He made us do that 30 times. Story 53. Trudging back from the mess to the hangar during a tactical evaluation, head down, hands in pockets. A young officer screams at me, "Airman, why do you have your hands in your pockets?" "They're cold, sir." "Why aren't you wearing gloves?" "I gave them to the guy who relieved me on sentry duty. So his fingers will be warm enough if he needs to shoot anyone, sir." "Okay. But why haven't you saluted me? I'm an officer, you know?" "Yeah, we've been told not to salute in wars. It makes officers a target for snipers, sir." "I assume you're from Crash and Smash?" "Yes, sir." "Well, go back there then." Hands back in pockets, I resumed my trudge. Royal Air Force in the early 1980s, just a holiday camp. Story 54. Back in basic training with the Marine Corps, requesting to use the restroom was a process in itself. If you made the mistake of saying it was an emergency, the drill instructors would instruct you to place your blue lens in your flashlight and borrow a buddy's to put the red lens in. Then you would run around the squad bay yelling, "Wee woo wee woo," until it was satisfactory enough to actually go use the restroom. The situation was absolutely hilarious, but God forbid you laugh. Story 55. In the Air Force, at your first permanent duty station, we would send you to the other side of the base to get jet wash. For those unfamiliar, jet wash is the force of the air behind a jet engine. Story 56. I was in the United States Air Force. We ran the obstacle course once. They told us that it wasn't a race and to please be careful. Story 57. A couple of funny guys had to put on their full battle gear, including their gas masks, and play tag around the bay. Now, the bay is where we sleep, so it's full of lockers and bunk beds. It's really not all that big, and the rest of us were sitting in the middle of the floor, cleaning our rifles. I don't even remember what the guys got in trouble for, but we remember the game of tag. We just remember them running around the outer ring of bunks and trying to tag each other, leaping in between bunks and flipping over them to stay away from the person who was it, while tripping because they were half blind in the masks and felt like they were suffocating. It was rather funny. Eventually, the drill sergeant called time, and all the guys ripped their masks off. The drill sergeant actually felt bad enough for them that he didn't punish the poor guy who was it any further. Those masks are extremely hot. Oh, and there was that one guy who got into so much trouble that he had to go around and clear any gravel or grass off the sidewalks. That doesn't sound too bad until you realize he wasn't given a broom and was specifically told to pick any dirt up off the sergeant major's sidewalk with his hands and return it to where it belongs. There was also the time our drill sergeant thought it would be delightful to have us take a shortcut to the dining hall. The shortcut was through the woods with a large dirt path, except for some reason there was a hole in the path. And I mean a hole. When it was dry, it was like marching down a steep hill and then immediately up a steep hill. This hole had to be 6 feet deep and probably 15 feet wide to make the slopes actually markable. The drill sergeant liked taking us through there when it was dry because the entire platoon would do this weird accordion thing with soldiers tripping over each other and struggling through the march. Once we got used to the hole, they actually stopped using that path until the day it rained. Actually, I think it was day 3 of rain in Oklahoma. Then they took us down that path. We nearly drowned, I swear. The hole filled to nearly waist height with water. The first row slipped and fell in, and the rear couldn't see what was happening, causing a pushing effect that eventually led to almost everyone except the last row ending up in the hole. The last row took one look at the drill sergeant and jumped in. We had wondered why every single one of our drill sergeants was escorting us to chow that time when we usually only had 1 or 2 with us. We learned why. Oh, and the hole wasn't just water. It was muddy water. We showed up to chow painted light brown from boots to neck, and some to the top of their heads if they were unlucky. We could hear our drill sergeants laughing with all the other drill sergeants from other batteries while we ate. Story 58. My first duty station, before I was allowed to do the actual work, was to move around 2,000 sandbags to another area and dump the sand. Once that was all done and I reported back, I was instructed to fill them back up and place them in the spot where they were before I dumped the sand. Story 59. Retired United States Army engineer. I can confirm that I sent a private first class in search of board stretchers in the back of a freight container packed full of tools in the Marshall Islands. He was gone for about an hour before returning to report he couldn't find one, so I sent him to ask the first sergeant where they were. The first sergeant sent him to the supply sergeant, who sent him back to me to report that the supply sergeant instructed him to report to me that he, the private first class, was not very bright. Story 60. Easy. Rotate the sand in the volleyball court. The second task would be to turn the rocks over in the yard in Arizona so they get an even tan. Story 61. I was a mechanic in the United States Army. I personally had to check for bad reflective crystals in the reflectors of all the vehicles in our team's personal motor pool. I had to do this by shining a penlight into the reflectors in broad daylight. Needless to say, I saw nothing and had no idea if anything needed to be replaced. I finally got sick of checking them maybe 45 minutes in and asked the team sergeant why we wouldn't do this at night with a larger light source before they started laughing and told me I could stop. So I felt like a fool. Another new guy got sent from motor pool to motor pool asking about acquiring a box of chemical light batteries. He spent the whole day doing that. I think he was smart enough to know the chemicals provide the light in a chemical light, but he liked messing around and didn't mind not being stuck turning a wrench for the day. This didn't become apparent right away, but after he'd been with the team for some time, we knew he probably fooled around the entire day just to get out of work. Some guys have slacking down to a science, even brand new privates fresh from advanced individual training. I wasn't around to see how he handled being a part of the E4 Mafia, but I bet he brought new excellence to the title. He was truly an I don't care guy from the start. God bless him. Story 62. We had a child who avoided being reprimanded because I am on 100% profile drill sergeant, but was instead ordered to salute every ant coming out of an anthill and say, "Good day, sir or ma'am." Hilarious. Story 63. Digging anti-tank mines into a road that was frozen solid. I guess it would go into the futile instead of the pointless category, as we only had foldable spades to accomplish the task. We hammered away with the rage of 1,000 chimpanzees, getting peppered with bits of gravel and sparks as we were pretty much just hitting an amalgamation of rock. We didn't have any eye protection, so we were smashing the ground blindly as the spades became bent. After an acceptable level of moral and material damage was reached, we sprinkled some crushed ice and dirt on top of the mines and called it a day. It was around minus 30 degrees Celsius, minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. Story 64. Not part of training per se, but there is a game officers like to play called ping pong. One of the officers finds the least experienced private they can and tells him that he needs to go to another officer, who is often on the other side of the base, and give him the coded message ping, and that he will understand what it means. Then, once the private finally reaches the other officer, he tells him he should go back to the first with the reply pong. I think you can guess what happens then. This can go on for hours. Story 65. We were standing around once as the off-going duty section, waiting for the oncoming section to finish their morning meeting. One of the chiefs came by and said if we all had time to just stand there and gawk, we could be put to good use drying off the bleachers on the flight deck. In a rainstorm. Story 66. The whole company spent about an hour aligning in perfect formation before an inspection, with nobody allowed to move their left foot. The first thing the inspecting officer says when he arrives is that he wants to see the formation formed dynamically. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.